Hi, welcome to my Hypotenmoose Kitchen. And today at the kitchen table we're working on fractions. And this is a particular way of working on fractions based on a fractions kit and on the area model of multiplication and thinking about number. So I'm going to introduce you to the kit. The one that's on the table is nearly finished, and when we're done the video you will know how to make your own. This sheet, which is actually gray, but you could make it out of white as well, is one whole. This is what we're considering to be the one whole piece. Out of red, we've made what teachers call to be a hamburger fold, and the hamburger fold was then sliced and made two halves. From there, each one of those folds, taking blue paper, was made into quarters. So we halved the halves into these long skinny strips. And then using purple paper, we've halved each one of those quarters to make eighths. You can see we've got 8 pieces here, all of equal size, and together the 8 eighths make up the same size as our original whole. Then along the other column, we have yellow paper making our thirds. I have yet to cut that. I've just folded it. I can give you some tips later on how you might fold it. Halves are nice and easy to fold. Thirds are a little harder. Here we've taken the thirds and halved them. So we did whatever we did to fold the thirds and made a half down the center to make sixths. And here you can either think of halving the sixths to make twelfths, or you can think of quartering, like so, the thirds to make twelfths, and maybe you can think of yet another way that you could make twelfths. And then when we take the eighths and third them, and I have yet to finish this, you can see I've only done these two. What I did at first was cut eighth strips. Well, I first of all cut quarter strips because they're easier to cut. You'll notice that this strip, and by the way, it's out of a brown on purpose because all the color cuttings are mixing to make this particular fraction here. We'll identify it in a moment. So we've got quarter pieces, which I've cut then into eighth strips and then thirded those. And when I'm done, I'm going to have, I don't know how many pieces I may have at the end of this. Perhaps you can guess before we get there, but if you can't, we'll get there together. Another thing I'll show you before we get to the actual cutting and some of the tips on the cutting. What do you need before you start? Well, I suggest you make these same colors that I make because there are going to be many videos that come after this which will be using these same colors. And if you can be using yellow pieces to be thirds and green pieces to be twelfths, then we can discuss things more easily as a community as we build things online. So I do have a gray in my case, but white would be fine, a yellow, an orange, and a red, a blue, a green, and a purple. And then you're going to have to figure out what you're going to use for this. I suggest brown because actually when all 3 primary colors mix, they do make a brown. So I went into my supplies for scrapbooking and I found a piece that has a pattern that's pretty browny. On the other side, it's a little more bright, but we're not going to be looking at that piece. So, and I didn't even have an extra sheet of that in order to show you in this area. Okay, so let's get going on our cutting. Okay, so I think the red or the halves are perhaps the easiest fold, but just to get us warmed up, when you fold things in half, you are creating halves. Sometimes we take that word for granted, half. We use it so often in our language that maybe we don't realize it's a math word. So here I did that hamburger fold, and then I'll cut down that fold. Using scissors is one way. I use this cutting tool here that I got a long time ago for my scrapbooking work. I'm not sure that it made it any faster actually because the blade is not that sharp on it. Okay, so I would cut that. I'm going to leave that kind of tucked under here because I don't think you have to watch me cut that. I think the more interesting one and maybe more challenging one is going to be this yellow to be thirds. And if you've got a really good eye, you can take one side in what we call the hot dog fold, but not quite having the hot dog, And you just have to be able to look until you think this side and this side are equal. Now you can get a ruler to help you see that they're equal and lay it across here. I measured in centimeters the length of the paper this way, the width of the paper if you will, and it was 21.6. I'll just look at you there. Hello. It was 21.6 centimeters, which if I divide by 3 is 7.2. So I did do a measure on one of my first cuts, and I measured 7.2 centimeters and made a little mark, folded it over, and then folded all the way. Then this area can be halved using the traditional hot dog fold. So I fold this over to match that line I just made, and I make that line. So at this point I can cut down each of those long lines to get my third strips. I'll just set that aside. Every one of those, the next shape I'm going to show you was made out of a third strip. So with orange, you'll do the very same thing. But then when you get to a strip that looks like this, you will fold it in half. And then you will cut it. Now these cuts are pretty precise. You might think I'm being pretty finicky about how you would cut. You want these to be as perfectly reasonable fractions, representations of fractions that you can do. If you're sloppy on your cutting, the mathematics that you create won't be as good. So the next thing, you have a couple of choices here. You could cut the green exactly like you did the orange, and then half each one of those 1/6 pieces. Notice that I have 2 of these who can fit exactly or cover the 1/6. 2/12 will cover 1/6, and we'll be talking about the meaning of that as we go. But building the kit will hopefully build some of those understandings in your mind. So if you're building this with a parent, make sure that you're part of the process, that you're not just letting your parent get that ready for you. And if you're a parent watching this, the tip is the other way around as well. Make sure your child is in on the game with you, because the building of the kit is part of the learning on the kit. Everything we do after this will also work. So just a little discussion on quarters. Quarters are made by taking what you did with red and doing it one more time. You do another a hot dog fold on that smaller piece. So quarters are there. And then to get to the 1/8 pieces, notice that 2 of our 1/8 pieces fit on top of the 1/4 piece. So you can slice these down the middle, measuring carefully, and get, once you get to the purple page, your 1/8 strips. And then, now we are actually going to do some cutting together. These pieces here, well, for what I did to get them was make 1/8 first of all out of my brown, and then 1/3 them. So here is the 1/3 arrangement of how the 1/8 become whatever fraction this is, and we'll know in a moment what that is. So I'm just going to do that with you with one of these. You might hear my cat meowing in the background, but that's okay, he can wait. So I take my 1/4 strip that I got by halving and then halving again, and yet I'm going to half one more time, making those 1/8 strips I promised you. So careful fold. And I like to fold it back again so it sits kind of flat. And then with my trusty tool, which isn't completely awesome, I have to say, I run a cut, and then I need to 1/3 this. And one way I can do that is to use paper I've already worked with and say, okay, well, what do the 1/3 pieces look like? Well, I know that it's going to be about there. And then if I fold that over, what I have learned already is when I cut my brown to start with, I cut it just a smidge long. So I'm going to get rid of that smidge that bothers me. And then I'm going to fold this side in. And that will give me those thirds, 1/3 of 1/8 piece. 1/3 of 1/8. Okay. And I'm going to do that a few more times and then show you the kit when it's done, and we'll talk about what these are. What fraction of a whole is this one? How many of these will I be able to stack on top of this gray sheet when I'm done? Okay, see you in a minute. Welcome back. Okay, so I finished the thirds after I spoke with you a minute ago, and we finished these pieces over here, the ones in brown. Okay, so I think we can figure out what fraction they are now. We have the 1/8 separations going in this direction. So we have 8 strips that have all been divided each into 3. And if you have studied multiplication, you might have a sense of how many pieces there are without counting. And if you haven't studied multiplication, this is a good opportunity to count. Maybe skip count by 3s or skip count by 8s, which is interesting either way. I'm going to do 3s. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. We've created 1/24 pieces. Pieces of each 1/24 large of the entire whole, this gray sheet that we left behind us. Now, maybe an easier way to think about what those pieces are is to, if you can count this really easily, this 12, 3 groups of 4, 4 groups of 3, each one of these got divided into 2 as well, and so you can maybe more intuitively know that the half of a 12th piece would be 24th, because you double how many pieces you'd have, right? You'd have 24 pieces. We'll get to all of that as we continue to explore together. Welcome to this World of Fraction kit and to this series hosted by the Hypotenmoose Kitchen.